April 1942. The assembly halls of Henschel und Sohn in Kassel, Germany, echo with the metallic symphony of precision engineering. Sparks cascade from welding torches like controlled lightning, illuminating the angular face of what would become the most feared tank of the European theater. The air tastes of machine oil and molten steel. German engineers in pristine overalls move with choreographed efficiency around the skeletal frame of Tiger No. 1, their hands guided by blueprints that promise invincibility. Outside, spring rain drumbeats against the factory's vaulted roof, but inside, the heat from the forges creates its own weather, a microclimate of industrial ambition. Each rivet driven into the Tiger's thick hide carries the weight of expectation, each gear calibrated to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. This is not mass production. This is the forging of legends, one beast at a time. Across the Atlantic, in the sprawling industrial plains of Detroit, a different rhythm pulses through American factories. The Ford River Rouge complex alone covers 2,000 acres, its assembly lines moving with the relentless logic of a waterfall. Every 24 hours, tanks emerge from these production lines not as singular achievements, but as an unstoppable tide. The clatter of pneumatic hammers merges with the hiss of hydraulics in a symphony of volume over virtuosity. Here, the air smells of rubber and diesel fuel, of possibility manufactured at speed. Young women in factory coveralls, rosy the riveters with lunch pails and determination, work alongside men too old or too essential for combat, their collective labor transforming raw materials into armored hope at a pace that would have seemed impossible just years before. The story of these two approaches to tank warfare represents more than competing philosophies of engineering. It embodies a fundamental divide in how nations understood conflict itself, how they valued perfection against pragmatism, how they measured victory not in the elegance of individual weapons, but in the crushing mathematics of sustained production. The Tiger I and the Sherman M4 would come to symbolize this divide, the former a masterwork of German engineering that could dominate any battlefield it graced, the latter an adequate machine produced in such overwhelming numbers that adequacy became excellence through sheer multiplication. When German military planners conceived the Tiger I in the desperate months after Operation Barbarossa stalled in the Russian winter, they imagined a weapon that would restore the initiative through technological supremacy. The Tiger would mount the legendary 88mm KWK-36 gun, a weapon already proven devastating in anti-aircraft and anti-tank roles. Its frontal armor would measure 100mm thick, sloped at angles calculated to deflect or absorb shells that would penetrate lesser vehicles. The Maybach HL-230 engine would push its 56 tons to speeds approaching 40 kilometers per hour on roads. This was to be more than a tank. It was to be a moving fortress, a psychological weapon that would shatter enemy morale before firing a shot. German tank crews, selected for Tiger training, approached their machines with something approaching reverence. These were men who had fought in Panzer IIIs and IVs, who understood tank warfare's brutal calculus. Now they stood before vehicles that promised to change that calculus entirely. Lieutenant Hans von Luck, who would later command Tiger units in Normandy, recorded his first impression. It was as if we had been given hammers after fighting with our fists. The Tiger represented everything we believed about German superiority, precision, power, overwhelming technical achievement. The crews trained for months on their machines, learning not just how to fight in them, but how to maintain the complex mechanical systems that made them function. Each Tiger required specialized tools, trained mechanics, and replacement parts manufactured to exacting specifications. But this burden seemed acceptable when weighed against the Tiger's battlefield dominance. The reality of Tiger production tells a different story, one written in bottlenecks and compromises. The Henschel factory, even working at capacity, could produce only 25 Tigers per month in 1942. This rate improved slightly, peaking at 104 tanks in April 1944, but never approached anything resembling mass production. Each Tiger required approximately 300,000 man-hours to complete. The interleaved road wheel design, which distributed weight beautifully and provided superior suspension, meant that changing a single damaged wheel often required removing multiple others first. The Maybach engine, powerful but temperamental, demanded constant maintenance and consumed fuel at rates that strained German logistics even in the best circumstances. The Tiger's transmission, stressed beyond its design parameters by the vehicle's immense weight, failed with dispiriting regularity. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, approximately 1,200 Tiger I tanks had rolled from German factories. Historians debate the exact number. Some sources cite 1,347, others 1,354, but the magnitude remains unchanged. This was the sum total of Germany's most feared armored weapon across 3 years of total war. Each Tiger represented an enormous investment of resources, skilled labor, and strategic materials that Germany could not easily replace. When a Tiger was destroyed or disabled, it represented not just the loss of a powerful weapon, but the loss of months of production capacity that could never be recovered. The men who crewed these magnificent machines learned quickly that excellence could become a prison. Tiger crews developed a saying, passed grimly from unit to unit: the Tiger is the best tank in the world when it runs. Mechanical breakdowns plagued the vehicles from their first deployments. In the muddy approaches to Leningrad, Tigers bogged down, their immense weight turning them into stationary pillboxes. In the North African desert, sand infiltrated the precision-engineered systems, grinding gears and seizing engines. During the Normandy campaign, Tigers often spent more time under repair than in combat. Crews learned to listen for the telltale sounds of impending mechanical failure, the whine of a stressed transmission, the irregular firing of engine cylinders starved of fuel, the metallic shriek of worn bearings. When Tigers did engage, they often performed with devastating effectiveness. At Villers-Bocage in June 1944, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's single Tiger destroyed approximately 14 tanks and 15 personnel carriers in 15 minutes, stopping an entire British armored column. At Kursk a year earlier, Tigers anchored German defensive lines, their 88mm guns destroying Soviet T-34s at ranges where return fire proved ineffective. These victories, documented in after-action reports and commemorated in German military tradition, reinforced the Tiger's legendary status. But legends German commanders learned too late cannot hold ground when the enemy can replace his losses, and you cannot replace yours. The German crews expected their technological superiority to prove decisive. They had been raised in a culture that celebrated engineering excellence, that measured progress in precision and craftsmanship. The Tiger embodied these values perfectly. It was the Panzer equivalent of a Swiss chronometer, every component machined to tolerances that ensured optimal performance. When German tankers climbed into their Tigers, they carried with them the confidence of men operating the finest equipment their nation could produce. They expected that excellence to matter, to translate into battlefield dominance that would offset any numerical disadvantages. What they experienced instead was the slow realization that excellence without abundance was merely another form of limitation. After major engagements, Tiger units would count their kills with satisfaction. 10 enemy tanks destroyed, 15, 20, only to watch as those losses were replaced within days, while their own disabled Tigers sat awaiting parts that might never arrive. German mechanics performed miracles with improvised repairs, cannibalizing damaged tanks to keep others running, but even miracles have limits. By late 1944, Tiger units operated at fractions of their authorized strength, not because tanks were destroyed, but because they couldn't be maintained or fueled or supplied with ammunition. The sound that came to haunt German tank crews wasn't the crack of enemy guns, but the silence of empty supply depots. Tigers required specialized ammunition for their 88mm guns, rounds precision manufactured to tight specifications. As Allied bombing degraded German industrial capacity, ammunition supplies became sporadic. Crews learned to hoard every round, to make shots count in ways that violated tactical doctrine. The Tiger's main advantage, its ability to engage enemy armor at ranges beyond effective return fire, became academic when ammunition shortages forced crews to wait until targets approached before firing. A Tiger without ammunition was merely an expensive pillbox, its sophisticated fire control systems and powerful gun reduced to psychological deterrence. Fuel presented an even more desperate equation. The Maybach HL-230 consumed gasoline with the appetite of a vehicle twice its size, achieving barely 1 kilometer per liter under optimal conditions. In combat operations, with frequent acceleration and maneuvering, consumption doubled. German fuel shortages, acute throughout the war, but critical by 1944, meant Tigers often sat immobile not due to mechanical failure, but simple lack of fuel. During the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, entire Tiger units advanced with the understanding that they would fight until their fuel was exhausted, then abandon their vehicles. Some crews pushed their Tigers to roadside positions overlooking key routes, intending to use them as static anti-tank guns until ammunition ran out. This was the mathematics of desperation, using the world's finest tank as a disposable weapon because no alternative existed. Across the ocean, American industrial philosophy approached tank production from an entirely different premise. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, military planners faced the challenge of equipping an army that would grow from hundreds of thousands to millions in mere months. The M4 Sherman, adopted as the standard medium tank, reflected American thinking about warfare itself, produced sufficient numbers of adequate machines rather than limited numbers of perfect ones. The Sherman would be good enough, reliable, maintainable, and most crucially, producible in quantities that could absorb losses and still maintain numerical superiority. The Sherman's design prioritized mass production at every level. Its welded hull construction allowed for assembly line techniques imported directly from automotive manufacturing. The radial aircraft engine initially used, later replaced by other power plants as production expanded, was reliable and available in quantities that matched projected tank needs. The 75mm main gun, while less powerful than the Tiger's 88mm, was sufficient to defeat most German armor and could be manufactured in unlimited quantities. The Sherman suspension, simpler than the Tiger's interleaved wheels, could be repaired in field conditions with standard tools. Every design choice reflected a single priority: keep the production lines moving. American factories transformed themselves with stunning speed. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit, built specifically for Sherman production, occupied 113 acres and employed 10,000 workers at its peak. The Fisher Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan, covered even more ground and operated around the clock, its assembly lines illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting that turned night into perpetual day. Workers developed specialized techniques to accelerate production. Methods for welding armor plate faster, for installing engines more efficiently, for testing electrical systems while other work continued. The factories hummed with American industrial might channeled toward a single purpose: bury the enemy in armor. The numbers tell a story that battlefield performance alone cannot convey. In 1942, American factories produced 10,874 Sherman tanks. Production accelerated to 21,245 in 1943, then peaked at 17,727 in 1944, before declining to 11,419 in 1945 as victory approached. By war's end, approximately 49,234 Sherman tanks had rolled from American assembly lines, 40 times the number of Tigers Germany produced. This disparity represented more than industrial capacity; it embodied fundamentally different theories of victory. Germany sought to win through excellence, America through overwhelming abundance. American tank crews approached their Shermans with distinctly different attitudes than their German counterparts brought to Tigers. There was no reverence here, no sense of operating irreplaceable masterworks. Sherman crews understood their machines as tools, reliable, reparable, and replaceable. When Sergeant Lafayette Poole's Sherman was destroyed in Belgium, he received a replacement within hours. When that Sherman was destroyed, he received another. Poole would ultimately have 5 Shermans destroyed beneath him, each time walking away and mounting a new machine to continue fighting. This was the American way of armored warfare: accept losses, replace losses, maintain offensive pressure regardless of casualties. The Sherman's adequacy became a source of dark humor among crews. They called their tanks Ronsons after the cigarette lighter, referencing their tendency to burn when penetrated, lights first time every time. They knew that in direct engagement with Tigers, their chances of survival depended more on numbers and tactics than vehicle superiority. The Sherman's 75mm gun could rarely penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges, while the Tiger's 88mm could destroy Shermans from distances where American crews couldn't effectively return fire. The mathematics seem cruel. It might take 4 or 5 Shermans to destroy a single Tiger, with the loss of several American tanks virtually guaranteed in the exchange. American Sherman veterans developed different relationships with their machines. Few romanticized the Sherman or claimed it was the war's best tank. Most acknowledged its limitations candidly, remembered its vulnerabilities, criticized design choices that cost American lives. Yet many also expressed appreciation for the Sherman's reliability, for the certainty that destroyed vehicles would be replaced, for the abundance of ammunition and supplies that kept them fighting. The Sherman represented American industrial democracy at war, not glorious or perfect, but sufficient and sustainable, good enough and available in quantities that made good enough into strategic advantage. April 1945. The Henschel factory in Kassel lies in ruins, its assembly halls torn open by repeated Allied bombing raids. The sophisticated machine tools that once crafted Tiger components are rubble or captured. The last Tigers rolled from German production lines in August 1944, 9 months earlier. Those final vehicles now sit destroyed across German territory, knocked out in battles that could delay but not prevent defeat, or abandoned by crews without fuel to move them. The 1,200 Tigers, dispersed across 3 years of war, have been reduced to handfuls scattered in defensive positions, mechanical masterpieces made irrelevant by strategic mathematics they could never overcome. Across Europe, American and Allied armored columns advance on Berlin from all directions. Shermans by the thousands press forward, absorbing losses and continuing, replaced as fast as they fall. The production lines in Detroit and Michigan continue running, though at reduced rates as victory approaches and contracts are canceled. The 49,000 Sherman has already rolled from assembly lines, joined by thousands more from British and Canadian factories producing Sherman variants. The mathematical disparity that defined the armored war is now visible in occupied territory, columns of American vehicles stretching to horizons, German armor reduced to isolated remnants fighting hopeless defensive actions. The epilogue to this story extends beyond military history into questions about how nations understand power itself. The Tiger I represented the belief that excellence could overcome material disadvantage, that superior engineering and training could defeat numerically superior forces. This belief had deep roots in German military tradition, validated by victories in the war's early years when tactical brilliance achieved decisive results against enemies with numerical advantages. But total war operates by different rules than limited conflict. Total war measures victory not in battles won, but in the ability to sustain operations until the enemy's capacity for resistance collapses completely. The Sherman represented a different understanding of power, democratic, industrial, rooted in abundance rather than excellence. The Sherman's adequacy became strategic sufficiency through multiplication, through the grinding application of resources sustained over years of continuous combat. This approach lacked the romantic appeal of elite units in magnificent equipment, but it proved devastatingly effective because it could be sustained indefinitely while enemy forces exhausted their limited resources. The Sherman embodied the truth that in total war, adequacy backed by abundance defeats excellence constrained by scarcity. The arithmetic of tank production, 1,200 Tigers, 49,000 Shermans, measures more than vehicles manufactured. It measures the distance between quality and quantity, between precision and proliferation, between military excellence and industrial democracy. Germany produced 1,200 masterpieces that could not prevent defeat. America produced 49,000 adequate machines that buried the enemy in steel. This disparity decided the war's outcome as surely as any battle, any strategy, any tactical innovation. The Tiger crews expected their technical superiority to matter decisively. They learned instead that excellence without the resources to sustain it becomes merely an epitaph, admirable, respected, ultimately insufficient. The larger truth this experience reveals concerns the nature of power in industrialized warfare. Victory flows not to the side with the best weapons, but to the side that can produce adequate weapons in quantities sufficient to absorb losses and maintain pressure until the enemy breaks. This realization transformed warfare itself, ending the era where tactical excellence and technical superiority could compensate for material disadvantage. The production lines of Detroit proved more decisive than the precision workshops of Kassel, not because American tanks were better, but because American industry could produce them in numbers that made individual quality comparisons strategically irrelevant. The freedom that America defended, the abundance it embodied, found expression in those assembly lines running 3 shifts daily, in the certainty that destroyed equipment would be replaced, in the confidence that material superiority could be sustained indefinitely. This was democracy's arithmetic, not the elevation of elites, but the mobilization of masses, not perfection but sufficiency, not masterpieces but volume. The 49,000 Shermans rolling from American factories declared a truth that shaped the modern world. In total war between industrial nations, victory belongs not to the most excellent, but to the most abundant, not to those who craft legends, but to those who produce numbers that make legends irrelevant. The Tiger I remains a legend, a magnificent machine that represented the peak of German tank design. The Sherman remains a workhorse, an adequate vehicle that did its job well enough, often enough, in sufficient numbers to help win the war. The Tiger embodies the seductive belief that quality can overcome quantity. The Sherman proves the harder truth. That quantity, when backed by the industrial capacity to sustain it, becomes its own quality, decisive, inexorable, ultimately victorious. The arithmetic of defeat was calculated not on battlefields but on production lines, measured not in kills per tank but in total tanks produced, decided not by excellence but by abundance. 1,200 versus 49,000. The numbers themselves tell the story, a story of competing philosophies, divergent approaches, different understandings of power itself. Germany bet on the Tiger's excellence and lost. America bet on the Sherman's adequacy multiplied to overwhelming numbers and won. The lesson echoes across time. In total war, adequacy sustained indefinitely defeats excellence exhausted by attrition. The production lines prove more decisive than the battlefields. The mathematics of industry determine the arithmetic of defeat. And in the end, the Tigers, magnificent and feared, were buried beneath an avalanche of Shermans whose greatest virtue was not superiority, but sheer, overwhelming abundance.